Hello, everyone. I'm very happy to welcome you to the Contemporary Echoes Mixpantli exhibition public programming, where we will be having two contemporary artists that are extraordinary. So this map making, a map is an expression of the way we know and conceive of space and time, two concepts that are at the base of our collective understanding of reality. Mariana Castillo De Val and Sandy Rodriguez's maps investigate and transform the cartographic tradition born out of the complex social dynamics of colonization in the years after the Spanish conquest of Mexico. The need to produce cartographic images of the Spanish Empire that would also be helpful to the administration of the lands, resources, and peoples was subverted by local indigenous painters who, like Deball and Rodriguez, appropriated the representation of space, transforming their maps into persuasive images that express their sacred connection to the lands and their communal and individual rights to the contested territories. Today, we have the privilege to see Sandy Rodriguez's work that merges different times and spaces in her cartographic work through a very clever artistic device. Her maps are drawn as recognizable modern representations of today's contested territories in the United States, the border, the western territories of the United States, where Rodriguez fuses past and present events with imagery made by 16th century painters and transforms these maps into complex multi-layer images of history. In her practice, Rodriguez adheres to a Central Mexico Nahuatl traditional way of understanding painting by personally collecting the minerals, the plants, the flowers, to transform these raw materials into pigments. And in that way, she is a tlacuilo, a painter in the Mesoamerican tradition. Mariana Castillo De Val also transforms space and history. She takes a kaleidoscopic approach to her practice, mediating between science, archaeology, and the visual arts, and exploring the way in which these disciplines describe the world. Her installations, performances, sculptures, and editorial projects arise from a combination of languages and the role of objects in them. Del Val Edge Floor Vista de Ojos, this huge map where you can walk through the first representation of Mexico City as a space already taken by the Spaniards. And Del Val's immersed black floor brings this history into the present, so you can be also transforming the present into the future. I leave you with both of them, now with Sandy Rodriguez, then with Mariana Castillo De Val. Then we'll go into a conversation that I will moderate, and you are going to be able to please ask questions so that these artists can answer your question. And that is what our program entails today. Thank you very much.
My name is Sandy Rodriguez, and we are standing here in front of the 2019 painting, Rainbows, Grizzlies, Snakes, Oh My, Conquest to Caging in Los Angeles. Behind me, you'll see a view of Los Angeles under a rainbow. This rainbow is a reference to the Florentine Codex and Book 12 de la Conquista, and is a reference to the frontispiece on the Nahua narrative that describes the Conquista from an indigenous perspective. Each one of those colors are hand processed from various insects, mineral pigments, and combinations of plant and earth material. Before painting this rainbow, I recite that text to connect with Tlacuilos and the painters that came before. Throughout this composition, you will see oak trees, grizzlies, and snakes, oh my, with this monumental map painted on amate, a once outlawed paper I am telling the story on how Los Angeles becomes the carceral capital of the world, plotting the locations of human caging, from the missions to child detention centers to prisons and jails, to the location where our neighbors and residents were captured and caged in Elysian Park during Operation Wetback in 1954. There are a number of details that viewers can unpack with this monumental work that is in the collection of the LA County Museum of Art by reading the map key that is here located next to it, that plots out not only the hand-processed colors, but the sites of human caging. This work, again, is a reference to the extraordinary work of historian Kelly Lytle Hernandez and her book, City of Inmates, Conquest of Caging in Los Angeles, as well as the Florentine Codex. We're gonna go ahead and take a look at the 2018 map that is further down in this corner here. This picture is the 2018 mapa for Los Angeles for the Angelenos that have been killed by police. This is the third map in the series, Codex Rodriguez-Mondragón, which is a series of maps and objects that reflect upon our current moment and collapse time and space to understand how we got here. What you're looking at is a sky that is painted in Maya blue, a color that was synthesized in the 3rd century that takes Palygorskite clay and indigo and fuses it to create one of the most permanent and beautiful colors in the range of colors of the Americas. There are a number of omens, like the comets and the owl, that are included to reference kind of the foreboding or foretelling of death. The red dots that are plotted across the city of Los Angeles are the locations where residents were killed by police in 2018. There are a number of floristic references, including Toyon, which is placed right here in Hollywood, the creosote, which is standing in for the deserts of Los Angeles County, the manzanita for the southern parts of Los Angeles County. You'll find a number of details and elements that are references again to the Florentine Codex, a 500-year-old manuscript. This particular map is one of the earliest maps of the depiction of Los Angeles. And with that, we'll go ahead and transition over to the next object. So all of these paintings are created on amate paper, which, as I've mentioned, is outlaw paper. It is created from the exterior bark of a tree called jonote, sometimes fig and sometimes mulberry. This particular object is painted on a jonote that is also infused with clay from the region in which it was created, outside of Puebla in San Pablito. So it is not only the flesh of the tree, but the skin of the earth. What we are looking at is an eje cósmico, an axis mundi, marking Los Angeles as the center of the universe. This is painted in hand-processed acorn ink to depict an ancient oak, an ancestor oak, and is inhabited with a number of flora and fauna from the oak woodlands communities. At the base here, what you're looking at is a sacred mountain with morteros, the sacred water, and the symbol of the underworld. You also have 4 colors marking the cardinal directions. And I'd say that this is providing hope for our future in terms of the collection of maps that you see here in the exhibition Mixpantli. We'll go ahead and take a look at the 2018 De los Señales, Pronósticos, Ice Raids de Califas in 2018. This is the second map of the series, the Codex Rodriguez-Mondragón. And again, I am trying to make sense of the immigration raids in 2018, where the federal government at the time decided to create immigration raids in locations of employment of migrant communities. This is in punishment for California being a sanctuary state. I am studying very closely Book 12 of the Conquest of Mexico and updating a lot of those images from the invasion. Instead of Spanish ships, you have Customs Border Enforcement marine vessels and air vehicles, unmanned drones, and UH Sikorsky helicopters with skull faces, or calavera copters as they call them. You'll see here at the top that you have the first omen from the Florentine Codex that is the column of fire. And instead of the omen being surrounded by male figures, I've replaced my self-portrait with scholars who I've been in conversation with and working with for years. So to the left, you'll see Dr. Ella Diaz, Dr. Diana Magaloni, myself, my mother, Guadalupe Rodriguez, may she rest in peace, and my sister, Elisa Rodriguez Gibson. There are a number of scenes of the capture and apprehension of brown bodies, much like you will find in Book 12 of the Florentine Codex, but you'll also find images of resistance. Here you have a scene of pro bono lawyers that are outside of a Northgate market at the alert of the invasion of ICE coming to apprehend residents. The state of California is infested with Customs Border Enforcement detention centers, ICE detention centers, and next to it you have these pustules as if they are a plague on the flesh of California. The annual wildfires are again standing in as omens and really collapsing that 500-year history of aggression on brown bodies. We'll go ahead and take a look at Mapa de Los Angeles 2020 for our neighbors killed by police amid protests against police brutality and pandemic. So you had a chance to see the 2018 map for our neighbors killed by police, and it was 35 residents. Amid a pandemic, when we are locked inside, the police did not slow down and also killed 35 neighbors. Their names are inscribed here. You'll find a number of omens like the owl, and you'll find that the Calavera copter is now an LAPD helicopter. The stars in the sky and the comet in the sky, an omen of death, are done in a 23 karat gold using a medieval painting technique. You'll also not miss the police cruiser that is set on fire in the center of this composition from the protests of 2020. Again, the ocean is inhabited with real and mythological animals referenced from the Florentine Codex, but there is a little camarón over in the corner that says, "Camarón que se duerme se lo lleva la corriente." And it's about being being alert and staying attentive to the issues that are happening around us, even if we are in the middle of some of the most turbulent years of our lives. I'd like to wrap with this map that's right over here behind us. And this is a 2019 map called You Will Not Be Forgotten. And this is the mapa for the children killed in Custom and Border Enforcement custody over 2018 and 2019. This map is also on the darker amate paper. It has a nighttime sky with 23 karat gold elements. And every bit of landscape that you see there is part of my process where I go off into the wilderness and I do weeks worth of field study, understanding medicinal plants that were used in the treatment of respiratory illness. This map marks the locations of 7 children from age 1 to 15 who died of neglect of respiratory illness in detention centers. You have the scene here of Goyito taking his last breath in a cell in a detention center with the time code that was published in ProPublica. You have the scene of weeping fathers right along the US-Mexico border. You have these white orbs that mark the locations of where these children took their last breath and their names and their ages inscribed below using Mayan numerical systems. Each one of these children, with the exception of one, were Guatemalteco, and they made the arduous journey from Guatemala, or Darlene, from El Salvador, to the border where they took their last breath. This is in memory and honoring their story. I've included elements to this map that are for the treatment of susto. There is a 16th century materia medica that was created in the same library or university as the Florentine Codex. And I unpacked that particular recipe because the first story of the first child who passed, Jacqueline Calmaquin, it said she died of dehydration and shock. So this remedio for susto is included for us who bear witness and for the families of these children. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sandy. It was excellent, your presentation. And now we have Mariana Castillo De Val, who's going to share with us her process for the floor. Hi, Mariana. So nice that you're here.
Hi, how are you? Yeah, I'm very happy to be able to be in this conversation. I'm sad that I cannot be there in present, but it has been also an honor to work together with Diana and also to share the space with the amazing work of Sandy Rodriguez. I will give you a small presentation of the background of the piece, so it will help us to continue our conversation afterwards. So the work that I am presenting in the exhibition, which is also now part of the collection of LACMA, it's based on this image that you see here, which is called the Mapa de Santa Cruz, or the map of Uppsala, because it's now in Sweden, in Uppsala. And as Diana mentioned at the beginning, it's one of the first depictions of Mexico City after the conquest. So it was painted in 1550. And it's a combination of already the European transformation of the city in the center of the city, like you see here, that you already have the colonial grid. And from the other hand, you still have a lot of elements from the Tlacuilo, because it was a traditional indigenous painter, Anonymous, who painted this map. You have a lot of glyphs also of the different regions of Mexico City. You also have a lot of the different crafts and ways of fishing, of capturing different insects and species and plants. You also have the slow transformation of the city that was formerly a lake. Here you have the whole section that was still a lake at the time before it was all dried up. There is the port of Tacubaya, where you have access to the lake, and many other elements. So in the work that I did, I transformed this piece into a wood engraving floor. So I drastically changed the size and the scale of this document, and I also transformed the technique it was made. So it's not a watercolor anymore. Now it's a wood carving. These are images of the first time I exhibited the work in Mexico in 2014. I put this image at the beginning because it's important to say that the floor is black, not because I painted it black, but because it's a printing matrix. So it was also a sort of reflection on the way we have access to this material. For example, the map of Uppsala, which is now in Sweden, I have never seen it in real. I just have access to it through reproductions in books, through digital images, and so on. So my work also speaks about this transformation of the original material into matrices, into things that transform themselves and that can be reproduced. So I call this work, which is not included in the exhibition, the Atlas Vista de Ojos. And it's basically a print of the floor on paper. So the visitors could go through the pages of this book and observe the different details of the original map. Well, now transformed by me into a drawing that also became a woodcut. These are also process images of the way the work was printed before it was installed in the exhibition space. It was printed at the Taco Workshop in Mexico City with Laura Valencia and with Sergio Garduño. And here you have also the way we lay down the paper. I mean, I think as in Sandy's work, the use of paper is very important in the work, and the paper as a medium or as a skin that could carry images in many different ways. This is the way we were hanging the different pages of the book before it was bound. We just made one copy of the book, and it took us about 1 month to print it because it was just so much work and so many panels to be printed. But what you see in the exhibition that I will show an image afterwards are complete prints of the panels, which is not the atlas itself, but they are samples of the different elements. Here you see the way the work was exhibited in the same way that it's now at LACMA. So the idea is that this change of scale in the original document makes the map walkable, so people can actually walk through this very early depiction of Mexico City and observe the different characters and the different activities that are performed. Something that is really interesting is, for example, this is the image of downtown, of the very center of Mexico City at the time. It was much smaller as it is now. Here you see I don't know if you see my cursor, but this is here the cathedral. And in this center, there is very few characters. There is just one character which is hidden behind the building. But apart from that, it's almost empty. It's like a desert colonial town. And from the other hand, on the outskirts of this colonial center, you see many characters and many activities being made. So these are some of the close-ups of the work. And well, why am I interested in printing and in reproduction? I think it's also a way to take the image and to transform it into something else, to also bring it into the present, and also to answer this question of to whom history belongs. I think this is something that I discussed together with Diana many times, also when we were developing the work, the exhibition in Tlili in Tlapali at the Amparo Museum in 2018. This question became even more clear, because in the moment that you take this imaginary and then you transform it into something else, you actualize the material and you make it present and you make it democratic and you change the way it's being read. This is one of the examples of the prints, which are also in the exhibition. And yeah, I also put this image because this character has a sort of viewing device. I'm not sure what it is, but the title of the piece is Vista de Ojos. And Vista de Ojos was an expression. As Diana mentioned, many of these documents also had a legal aspect. So the Tlacuilo would make a map of a certain territory or a certain piece of land. And then this document was actualized by the colonial authorities. It was signed off. And this act of signing off was called Vista de Ojos, which is a little bit of a tautology because it means looking at the eyes. So it was like an eye on top of another eye. So it was the colonial gaze on top of the indigenous gaze. So that's why the title of the work is Vista de Ojos, because of this gesture that made the work of the Tlacuilos or the work of these indigenous painters valid as a legal record of a certain kind of procedure, let's say to distribute land or to legalize the construction of a church or just to settle a certain aspect related to the territory. Well, I think this is all that I have to say about the work now. I'm very happy to start the conversation with Sandy and with Diana. Thank you.
Excellent, Mariana. Thank you so much for sharing with us this process and the conceptual framework with which you created the map. It's amazing. So I am so excited to have these two great artists and very close and good friends here with
Do we
me.
have to enable the?
And I would like to start the conversation with a question to any one of you who would like to answer. When we look into the past, with that question, Mariana, that you raised, to whom history belongs, I can see, I can almost feel and read and hear the voices through the images of the artists of the Tlacuiloque in plural, who created these documents. Let's say the Florentine Codex, or this map of Uppsala, or even these mapas de Merced that are in Mixpantli, so humble, and at the same time, you know, they are expressions through art. And how do you imagine these artists? How do you relate to these traditions? I would like you to just like try to touch these human beings behind the images in what you answer.
That's a wonderful question, Diana. I'll tell you that in the processing of colors, in the reading of the Florentine Codex and reciting the passages in Spanish, there is that connectivity of the handling of material and that processing of the paint in order to connect with the act of creation. And while I'm 3 generations pintora mexicana, chicana, this act of working with these historic materials, I feel connects me to a greater generational kind of ancestral line of painters in order to create these visual narratives.
I like
yeah, from I'm no, sorry.
No, just to
I think
and the difference between you, Mariana, and Sandy, it's also our location. No, we are Mexicans. We are so like almost, you are born with your cord to that history, and here in Los Angeles, it's you have to bring it and rekindle it. So I see that as a very good dialogue between you and her, just to say. But
no, I just wanted to add that also while looking at the original images and retrace them and repaint them, you start to discover like secrets which are hidden in the documents. For example, the fact that the Uppsala map, the colonial center, is almost empty. There's no one walking around there. So there must be a reason for that. Or also that that Tlatelolco is very present in the Uppsala map, even if, I mean, it's obvious that it was also painted in the same place where the Florentine Codex and the Badiano Codex was painted. So there are always like hints related to the use of colors. So why this kind of color and not this other kind of color, or just the signs which are embedded, that they're not always totally transparent. And they always tell us like what the Tlacuilo wanted to say to us in a way of secret, because they were also in an oppressive regime. So they were not able to speak loudly what they wanted. So they were working for someone else. That's why this gaze on top of the gaze is important, and you need to search behind the scenes to discover what they actually wanted to tell us.
Great. The other thing that I wanted to just say to both of you and see what you think of these. When you look at these maps, just as you're saying, Mexico City is empty. It's just like that center has been taken over someone else who kind of is not present, because you're painting a map of your sacred land, and you have that sacred connection to the land you inhabit. It's your mother. And so that part has been taken over. Someone else. It's empty. Their buildings are beautiful. It's going to be okay with the king when he sees his beautiful city in New Spain, no? When the map travels to Europe. But then you paint all over with all the activities, all the fishermen, the hunt, the building of a little temple, all the names of the towns, like in the past. and that life continues to be. So it seems so innocent. It seems so, out of, it is just beautiful. Even if the King of Spain would have looked at that map, he wouldn't see that subversion. And when I hear your descriptions of your maps, Sandy, you are doing exactly the same thing. You're following a tradition of these very, like, the truth is subtle, but it's there. And the map is just, it's almost like an objective means of communicating something. In a sense, you are really resisting another kind of colonization in the present. And I just wanted to share those observations and hear your response to that.
I love those observations, and I think that to pull a thread between Mariana's last comment, it's this system of communication with colors, this conceptual way of speaking on a variety of levels to various audiences that I've been so excited by when creating these maps. The very intentional and very strategic way in which color is located and addressing and or symbolically standing in for various time periods and various communities, I think is something that I'm very much taken with as I'm working on creating these narratives that collapse time and space and speak to various audiences and various contexts. And I'm just thrilled, Diana, that I'm having this moment to chat with you and Mariana. So thank you.
And in your work, Mariana, the fact that you are activating history, in a sense, you bring history into the present to create a different future, and you do it with that same subtlety that Indigenous painters do. So in a sense, you are also at L'Aquila, and I just wanted to say that is why the two works work together so well, and that people that come into the gallery are really moved. They need to discover your work, because both your work has a lot of codes and a lot of layers. It is not a scream, it's not right there, but I think it really complements one another, and I have been very, very amazed by that. I don't know if you have any other comment, or I should start just bringing in some of the questions of the public.
I just wanted to ask something to Sandy, because she was mentioning on the last work that you have this recipe for the children that died out of dehydration. And was it one from the Badiano Codex, or?
Yes, so there's a recipe written in the Badiano Codex, and for those of you unfamiliar with the Cruz Badiano, it was written by a Nahua physician who survived both the Conquista and the epidemic that wiped out 90% of the population, 80 to 90% of the population. So you might imagine that from that generation, there were a need for a variety of potions and poultices and treatments for everything from stupidity to trauma to goatee armpits. The Remedio for Susto is written in 16th century Latin by this physician and his counterpart. Now, that translation has had a couple of different translations from the 1930s to the 1950s, and there's a number of inconsistencies. So I took it upon myself to consult with a number of scholars, both in Los Angeles, but also in Rome, to really try and get a new translation, a 16th century Latin translation, to get a little bit closer to what those ingredients are. And so each year I uncover a couple more of those, and it's now going on 3 years that I've been trying to fully get that recipe in its total form to make a visual recipe, much like you have kind of these visual narratives.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah, they are very obscure, the recipes that are in that book. They're almost like small stories or novels, because they're not just plants, but they also have animals and blood,
Yeah.
and also a lot of ingredients which we are not sure what they are, because the plants are in Nahuatl, but the
Yes.
other things are in Latin. So it's like a total mixture of things.
And Mariana, when you're talking about the plants, the spelling in 16th century is really varied when you're talking about the same plant. So we're talking about Cacalosochitl, which is plumeria, Rubra acutifolia. And when you cross-reference the spelling of plumeria in Nahuatl from the Cruz Bariano to the Florentine, the spelling is completely shifted. And so you really have to go down a rabbit hole to understand, are we talking about the same plant? You have to go into the footnotes on the Deball and Anderson translations, and then cross-reference with special issues of Antropología Mexicana, and then cross-reference that to make sure that you've got the exact plants that are referenced. But it's certainly a labor of love and something that I'll be continuing.
Yeah, it's like a detective work.
But it's in the map, in the 2019 map, you will not be forgotten. These recipes really to, it's an homage and a way of honoring the trauma of these kids just dying, crossing the border. No, so it's a magic potion that goes beyond exactly knowing what it was, just that. But it's so coded, no? So in the same way that we are studying the Florentine Codex and reading and seeing these things, in the future, these works that you are creating are going to be studied like that too. You know, it's not that easy just to grasp the profundity of the work you do. Super good. And I have here some interesting questions. Something that, what is your process, in a sense, of map creation? How do you see map making as opposed to just, you know, representation as a way of communicating these ideas that you have?
Well, I would say in my case, first we need to ask ourselves, what is a map and what is an image? And I think in the case of this map, images or space-time diagrams, is not so clear because the Europeans had an idea of what a map was. So it needed to be like a layout, and it was just about space. But what is interesting about the Mesoamerican map making is that it collides time and space. So there are always images of spaces which are inhabited. So there is something happening there. There is a narrative. So there are these two elements which are playing a role simultaneously. And I think it's a much more interesting way to think about map making rather than just the occupation or the control of space, because mapping is about controlling space. But I think these images that we are studying, it's also about understanding how people inhabit those spaces and the metaphors and the stories and all the other things that are existing in that map or in that image. So a map is just a snapshot also of a specific moment, but it cannot be a map as an abstract map that can work as the mapamundis that we see, that they describe as the territory. So the territory is always something that exists in the moment, in the present, through these images that sometimes we call maps, or sometimes we call them map images or narrative maps. I don't know.
It's super interesting. Absolutely, I agree with you. And Sandy, your maps are really maps of like really our present day tradition of map making, but you transform them through imagery, just like bringing what Mariana is saying. Can you talk about it?
Of course. And I'll tell you that each map from the series Codex Rodriguez-Mondragón, which now contains 11 maps, is a meditation and a study of how we describe place and how we create these visual narratives of this present moment on this contested land. So while I'm looking at a variety of historic map sources, including the Relaciones Geográficas, including the diseños, which are the maps of the Western US that would have also been used in a legal context to describe territories that belong to families, I'm looking at maps of the past 500 years created in the Americas, but then also looking at contemporary maps. And there's a combination and a confluence of these various traditions of map making to make it legible to contemporary audiences in 2022. There are opportunities in which we can describe locations by a number of devices, and it's something that I'm constantly playing with. So sometimes you'll find a more kind of satellite view or more topographical view or a confluence of the both, but it is something that starts very slowly, and each one of these maps take anywhere from a year to 2 years to make, because there is this slow study and site specificity of material, as well as how that unceded land has been described throughout the past couple hundred years.
And then there's a question of the public. Both of you have related to this about language, about Nahuatl. And the question is specifically of how Nahuatl influences the way the plants are described. But I would also say how Nahuatl is connected to map making through naming.
Mm-hmm.
No, the names of places are still, no, how language really connects to the narrative of space and time.
Yeah, I think that's also very important, because these images, they're not just maps and narratives, but they're also writing. So there's actually writing on those images. So all the toponyms, all the names of the different regions, for instance, of what Mexico City was at that time, are written on the image. So they are not drawings, they are actually words, it's actually writing. And I think that's also something very important, because at the beginning, the Spaniards were saying that we didn't know how to write, or we didn't know how to transform the language into writing. So they didn't understand that that was writing.
Yeah, and in a sense, writing had like a status that was like the word, no? The word had the status of creation. So your names, the names and the images of those sacred mountains with the name of the glyph, it's not only naming, but it's also reconnecting that naming to the story of creation. No, so in a sense, it's the preservation of time and space forever. It's very special, and bringing this into your experience of growing here, Sandy, as a Chicana artist, as you know, how do you relate to Spanish? How do you relate to Nahuatl? How do you relate to the words that in a sense describe memories and experiences that are so difficult to share with the rest, no, of the community around you, and how you translate that experience?
Well, I'll tell you, as a Chicana from the border region of San Diego and Tijuana, I grew up in two worlds and have inherited the cultural inheritance from two cultures. My family has roots going into central Mexico and then going into Los Angeles. So throughout the kind of production of my artistic career, it has been very interesting, especially in the past 6 years, to do a lot of research based on the Florentine and to understand the naming of locations and plants and the etymology of some of the Nahuatl language. Simultaneously, over the past 2 years, I've been doing a lot of research on Tongva, which is the territory that is Los Angeles, the ancestral caretakers of this region. Luckily, I have had conversations with contemporary Tongva artists and cultural liaisons over the past few years that have put me in touch with various linguists and confirmed or denied the spellings in Tongva to understand the traditional names of describing sacred mountains, rivers, locations here in Los Angeles. So it's a very interesting moment for me to really think about language, where and how we use text to describe places and sites for contemporary audiences while still using that visual representation for sites. So it's about taking elements from these systems of communication and pulling them together through an object for contemporary audiences, knowing that this study is an ongoing kind of lifelong exploration. As a child from the border living in Los Angeles, it is work that I just loved and adore doing.
No, it's fantastic. It's fantastic. That I have other questions from the audience. Let me just read. One of the things is that if you use these geographic information systems to do your map making and to bring these two maps together, like the past and the present. Sandy.
So do I? Of course. I mean, there's a number of strategies for layering historic maps with contemporary maps, pulling out elements that are recognizable, but then infusing it with some of these other particular time periods. Because as we've discussed throughout this presentation, mapping has a very loaded and political kind of connotation in terms of why these maps were created for which audiences. And so understanding that it can stand in for a number of strategies for various constituencies, there's a lot of opportunity when you're talking about mapping and making visible a place we call home and a region that is also home.
Mariana, I wanted to ask you, I mean, I've seen other floors. Now that you have this exhibition at the Contemporary Museum at UNAM, no, the MUAC, that you have this floor where actually you're stepping on time. It's just like, it's so amazing. The idea of creating a floor, because you could have also done like a huge map on the wall. Like, what is this interactive capacity of your work? What does it bring to all of these layers of knowledge and histories that you are conveying?
Yeah, I think first of all, it's a different way to read an image when you read it on a wall, and especially a map when you're able to walk on top of it. You also use your body to walk through this image instead of just using your gaze to try to read it. So it's the same way when you're reading a book and you have it in your hands, and it's more like a portable device, a map that has these dimensions that you can actually walk through, changes your perception and also the way your body interacts with the material. And that's something that it's quite interesting for me. Also, the way you transform, as Sandy says, that you need to transform the original sources in different ways to transform the reading, because if you keep it in the original way, this transformation doesn't happen in the person who is making the work, in this case, the artist or the tlacuilos or tlacuilas, and also in the person who is inhabiting the work. And also, let's say, when this work became also a printing device, the amount of time that I spent rubbing these panels with ink and going through with the printing press, it was 1 month of really carefully touching the territory and printing it into a sheet of paper. So this very slow process was also important as a different way of reading the material in terms of labor, let's say, as in the same way that you need to prepare the pigments and prepare the support and the ways that you're actually making the work. This aspect of going through it again with the ink and with the paper is similar to the way the spectator walks through this territory again and again.
I love that, Mariana. And I think to add a little bit on that power of the material and that power and that tactility of working with your materials and working with my materials is a very physical and a very potent and powerful experience, which is why I was so excited to be able to share this conversation with you both, but to do it here with these objects in the real space, absorbing the life force of the amate, absorbing the life force of the plant-based color and the mineral power. So it's just beautiful to hear you talk about your work, Mariana.
Thank you, likewise.
It's so nice to hear you talk both about your work. It's outstanding. I think you're really at the forefront of art in a way that you are really bringing history, the layers of history, and transforming it into the present. And I hope that many people can be interested in these processes. And also, I emphasize the fact that you are taking this inheritance of the indigenous world and making it present today. It's so important for the world we're living in. And I really thank you so much for being in this wonderful program and for being with us through all this time at LACMA and sharing your work.
Thank you, Diana.
I don't know if you have any
Sandy.
other comments or something to say before we close the program.
No, I'd just like to say thank you so much for having me. It is really an honor to share this exhibition space with Mariana and with Cielo, and to have the opportunity to work with Diana and to bring together so many of these maps from various collections for our audiences here in Los Angeles. So it is, again, truly an honor, and thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Stay healthy.
Cuídense.